The man in bed 7 had been dying for 6 months, and Nia West had watched every minute of it. Not literally, of course. She had other patients, other beds, other slow catastrophes unfolding in the fluorescent purgatory of Memorial General's emergency department. But bed 7 had become a kind of fixed point in her universe, a place her attention returned to the way a tongue returns to a loose tooth, probing for pain. They called him Ben. He'd given that name during his first admission, back in March, when the cherry blossoms were still holding on outside the hospital windows and his kidneys were merely failing rather than failed. No last name, no address, no emergency contact. Just Ben, spoken in a voice that suggested he'd once had more names than he knew what to do with, and had shed them like old skins. He was white, or close enough that the intake forms had defaulted there. Olive-skinned, with hair that might have been dark brown before illness had leached the color from it. His age was listed as approximately 45 to 55, which was the hospital's way of saying nobody had any idea. Homelessness did that to people. It added years that weren't there, subtracted the ones that were. Ben looked like a man who had been weathered by something more corrosive than time. But it was his eyes that Nia remembered from that first night. Hazel, flecked with gold, and utterly, terrifyingly calm. Most patients in renal failure were scared. They cried, or raged, or bargained with whatever god they still believed in. Ben just looked at her with the patience of someone who had already accepted an outcome the rest of them were still fighting against. "You're going to feel a small pinch," she told him, sliding the 4-needle into the back of his hand. "I know," he'd said. And then, inexplicably, "Thank you for warning me anyway." That was the thing about Ben. He noticed. In a place where patients were processed like items on a conveyor belt, vitals, meds, discharge, next he noticed the small courtesies. He thanked the custodian who mopped his floor. He apologized for the trouble when his blood pressure crashed and alarms filled the room. Once, during a particularly brutal round of dialysis, Nia had seen him reach out and steady the hand of a young resident who was shaking so badly she couldn't hit a vein. "Third time's the charm," he'd said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I believe in you." The resident had burst into tears in the supply closet afterward. Not from the failure, she told Nia, but from the kindness. "Who does that?" she'd asked, mascara running down her cheeks. "Who comforts the person who's hurting them?" Nia didn't have an answer. She only knew that in 23 years of nursing, 7 in pediatrics, 8 in oncology, and now 8 in the emergency department, she had never met anyone quite like the man in bed 7. Dr. Evans delivered the verdict on a Tuesday in September, when the air outside was thick with humidity and the promise of storms. "He's being moved to palliative care," he said, not looking up from his tablet. He was a good doctor, Evans, thorough, competent, not unkind. But he had learned, as all doctors eventually do, to deliver bad news with a certain clinical distance. It was the only way to survive. Nia felt the words land somewhere in her chest, a dull impact she hadn't been prepared for. "No," she said. "Not yet. There must be something." "There isn't." Evans finally met her eyes, and she saw the exhaustion there, the accumulated weight of 10,000 similar conversations. "His kidneys are gone, Nia. Completely. He's not a candidate for the transplant list. No address, no insurance, no way to guarantee post-operative care. Even if a kidney fell out of the sky tomorrow, the committee wouldn't approve him. You know how this works." She did know. That was the worst part. She knew exactly how it worked, had seen it work exactly this way dozens of times before. The system wasn't malicious. It was simply indifferent. It had rules, and the rules existed for reasons that made sense in aggregate, and individual people fell through the cracks every day because of them. "He's a person," she said, hearing the weakness in her own argument. He deserves a lot of things." Evans's voice softened slightly. "But I can't give him a kidney, and neither can you." "I'm sorry. No. I really am. He's a good man. Sometimes the good ones don't make it." He walked away, and Nia stood in the hallway, surrounded by the familiar chaos of the emergency department, the beeping monitors, the distant wail of an ambulance, the low murmur of a dozen private tragedies, and felt something shift inside her. Not break, exactly. More like settle, the way tectonic plates settle before an earthquake. She went to see him that evening, after her shift ended. She told herself it was professional. A final check. Tying up loose ends. Ben was sitting up in bed, which was a small miracle in itself. The dialysis machine hummed beside him, doing the work his body could no longer manage. He had a book in his lap, something thick and serious-looking, with a cracked spine that suggested it had been read many times before. Nia glimpsed the title, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Light reading? She asked, settling into the chair beside his bed. Heavy thinking, he replied, but it helps. He closed the book carefully, as though it were something precious. You're here late. Couldn't sleep. Liar. His voice was gentle, almost teasing. You slept fine last week when Mr. Patterson coded. You slept fine when the Chen baby was born 3 months premature. You don't lose sleep over patience, Nia. You're too good at this for that. Maybe I'm losing my edge. Maybe. He studied her face with those unsettling hazel eyes. Or maybe you heard about the palliative transfer and came to say goodbye. The directness of it caught her off guard. She'd expected denial, or hope, or the kind of magical thinking that sustained most terminal patients. Instead, Ben regarded his own death with the same calm attention he gave everything else. I came to see how you were doing, she said. Dying, he said simply. But I've been doing that for a while now. I'm getting rather good at it. Something in his tone made her throat tighten. That's not funny. No, he agreed. It isn't. But it's true, which is almost as good. He shifted slightly, wincing at some pain he didn't mention. I wanted to thank you, actually. For the past 6 months. You've been kinder than you needed to be. That's my job. No, it isn't. He shook his head slowly. Your job is to take my vitals and manage my medication and make sure I don't fall when I try to use the bathroom. Your job is not to bring me extra blankets without being asked, or to sit with me during the night shift when the ward is quiet, or to remember that I like my coffee with 2 sugars and no cream. He paused, something flickering in his expression. Your job is not to see me. The silence that followed was thick with things unsaid. Nia looked at this man, this homeless, nameless, dying man, and felt the full weight of her helplessness pressing down on her. In a few days, he would be transferred to a quiet room at the end of a quiet hallway where he would be kept comfortable until his heart stopped or his lungs filled with fluid or his body simply gave up. It would be peaceful, probably. Dignified, even. But it would also be wrong, in a way she couldn't articulate. A good man, dying because the math didn't work out in his favor. I wish I could do more, she said. You already have. He reached out and touched her hand, his fingers cool and dry. More than you know. She noticed then, as she had noticed 100 times before, the small crescent moon birthmark on the inside of his wrist. A pale, silvery curve against his skin, like something carved there by a careful hand. She had traced its outline with her eyes during countless blood draws and 4 insertions, a tiny landmark on the map of his body. It seemed, in that moment, unbearably fragile. A small mark on a man the world was about to forget. Get some rest, she said, rising from the chair. I'll check on you tomorrow. Tomorrow, he agreed. But his eyes said something different. They said, we both know there won't be many tomorrows left. Nia drove home in the dark, her mind full of noise. The streets were slick with recent rain, and the traffic lights reflected off the wet pavement like scattered jewels. She lived in a small house on the east side of the city, a 2-bedroom bungalow she'd bought 10 years ago with her first real savings. It had a cramped kitchen, a backyard the size of a postage stamp, and a porch where she sat most evenings, watching the neighborhood children play until their parents called them in for dinner. She didn't sit on the porch tonight. She went straight to her laptop, opened it on the kitchen table, and started typing search terms she'd never thought she'd type. Living kidney donation. Altruistic donor requirements. Non-directed kidney donation process. The information came in waves, medical journals, patient testimonials, hospital protocols. She learned that a healthy person could live a full life with 1 kidney. She learned that living donor kidneys had better outcomes than cadaver donations. She learned that anonymous donation was possible, though rare, and that the process involved extensive psychological screening, physical testing, and a waiting period designed to ensure the donor wasn't acting on impulse. She was O-negative, universal donor. The compatibility odds were better than average. The thought had been forming in some unlit corner of her mind for weeks now, maybe longer. She had refused to look at it directly, the way you refuse to look at the sun. But now, in the quiet of her kitchen, with the rain drumming softly on the roof, she finally let herself see it clearly. She could save him. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally. She could give him a piece of her body, and he would live. It was insane. It was impulsive. It went against every professional boundary she had ever learned. And it felt, inexplicably, like the truest thing she had ever considered doing. She picked up her phone and called her sister. Amara answered on the third ring, her voice groggy with interrupted sleep.
Nia?
It's almost midnight. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. The lie came automatically, a reflex. I just needed to talk. A pause, and then the rustle of sheets as Amara sat up. Nia pictured her sister's apartment, the organized chaos of files and spreadsheets, the color-coded calendar on the wall, the sensible furniture chosen for durability rather than style. Amara was an accountant, which surprised no one who had ever met her. She had been balancing equations and managing budgets since childhood, first for their parents' struggling household, then for herself, and now for a roster of small businesses that relied on her meticulous attention to detail. You're calling me at midnight because nothing's wrong, Amara said flatly. Try again. It's about a patient. The homeless man.
Ben.
It wasn't a question. Amara had heard enough fragments of the story over the past months to assemble a rough picture. I thought they were moving him to hospice. Palliative care. And they are. Nia took a breath. I'm thinking about donating him a kidney. The silence that followed was so complete that Nia briefly wondered if the call had dropped. Then Amara spoke, her voice carefully neutral in a way that signaled anything but neutrality. You're thinking about major surgery. For a stranger. A stranger who is, by all accounts, dying anyway. He's dying because his kidneys failed. Give him a kidney. He stops dying. You don't know that. You don't know anything about his medical history, his lifestyle, his... Amara caught herself, took an audible breath.
Nia. Honey.
I know you care about your patients. It's one of the things I love most about you. But this is too much. This is you trying to fix something that can't be fixed. Why can't it be fixed? I have 2 kidneys. He has none. The math is simple. The math is not simple. Amara's voice rose, then immediately dropped again, as though she'd remembered the neighbors. The math includes surgical complications, post-operative infections, the fact that you would be giving a vital organ to a man who has no address, no support system, no way to take care of himself after the fact. The math includes the possibility that you could die on the operating table, or spend the rest of your life on dialysis yourself. You are not a math problem, Nia. You're my sister. Nia closed her eyes, letting her sister's fear wash over her. She understood it, felt it, even. A cold thread of doubt winding through her certainty. But underneath the fear was something else. Something that felt like clarity. Do you remember what Dad used to say? She asked. About the only currency that mattered? Another silence. Then softly, kindness. He said kindness was the only currency that appreciated over time. He gave that homeless man, Marcus, his winter coat once. You remember? The one Mom had saved for months to buy him. He gave it away without even thinking about it, because Marcus was cold, and he wasn't. That was a coat, Nia, not an organ. The principle is the same. No, it isn't. Amara was crying now. Nia could hear it in the thickness of her voice. The principle is not the same. Dad gave away his coat. And then he came home and wore an old sweater instead. You can't wear an old sweater instead of a kidney. You can't. I know I can't. Nia's voice was gentle but firm. I know what I'd be giving up. I know the risks. I've read everything there is to read about this. And I'm not making a decision tonight. There's a whole process, months of screening and testing and psychological evaluation. I might not even be approved, but I needed to tell you because you're my sister and I don't want to do this without you knowing. Amara was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was stripped of all pretense, small and scared in a way Nia hadn't heard since they were children. I don't want to lose you. You won't. You don't know that. No, Nia admitted. I don't. But I know that if I don't at least try, I'm going to lose something worse. I'm going to lose the person I've spent my whole life trying to be. The rain had stopped. Outside her window, the world was dark and still and waiting. The process was exactly as rigorous as Nia had expected. There were blood tests and urine tests, CT scans, and psychological evaluations. She met with a donor advocate named Sarah, a kind-faced woman with graying hair and a gentle manner that couldn't quite conceal the sharp intelligence underneath. Sarah asked questions that felt like excavations, digging carefully through the layers of Nia's motivations. Why this patient? Sarah asked during their third meeting, her pen poised over a legal pad. You've seen hundreds of patients in similar situations. Why him? Nia had prepared for this question, had rehearsed answers that were logical and defensible. But in the moment, sitting in Sarah's small office with its motivational posters and dying fern, the prepared answers felt like lies. I don't know, she said. Or rather, I know, but it's hard to explain. He's good. Not in a saintly way, not in a way that makes other people uncomfortable. Just quietly, consistently good. He notices things. He cares about the people around him, even when he's the one who should be cared for. And the system is going to let him die because he doesn't have the right paperwork, and I can stop that from happening. I have the literal, physical ability to stop it. How do you walk away from that? Sarah studied her for a long moment. Do you understand that this is a one-way decision? Once the kidney is gone, it's gone. You can't change your mind. I understand. And you understand that the recipient will likely never know who you are? This is an anonymous donation. He'll know he received a kidney, but not who it came from. That's fine. Better than fine, actually. The anonymity felt important, a way of keeping the gift pure, untainted by expectation or obligation. I'm not doing this for gratitude. What are you doing it for? Nia thought about the question. Thought about her father, dead now 7 years, who had spent his life teaching history to teenagers who didn't want to learn it and loving them anyway. Thought about Ben, with his cracked copy of Marcus Aurelius and his habit of steadying the hands of nervous residents. Thought about the simple arithmetic of suffering. She had something he needed, and the cost of giving it was something she was willing to pay. Because I can, she said finally. Because it's the right thing to do. And because I want to live in a world where people do the right thing, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Sarah nodded slowly, making a note on her pad.
All right, she said.
Let's proceed. The compatibility tests came back positive. Better than positive, nearly perfect. Ben's body and Nia's were, immunologically speaking, remarkably well-suited. The surgical team was cautiously optimistic. The ethics committee, after some debate, approved the donation. Nia told no one except Amara, who had moved from opposition to grudging acceptance to something that almost resembled support. If you're going to do this stupid, beautiful thing, she said, then I'm going to be there when you wake up. And you're going to wake up. That's non-negotiable. The surgery was scheduled for Friday in late October. The trees had turned by then, their leaves blazing orange and red against a steel-gray sky. Nia spent her last day off at her parents' graves. Her mother had followed her father by 18 months, as though she couldn't bear the loneliness of survival, and stood for a long time without speaking. She wasn't religious, not exactly, but she liked to think they were somewhere, together, watching. I'm doing something Dad would approve of, she said finally, her breath misting in the cool air. I hope you'd approve too, Mom. Even if you'd also tell me I was being foolish. She touched the cold marble of their headstone and went home to pack her hospital bag. The night before the surgery, she returned to the hospital for a final shift. It wasn't required. She'd been on leave for a week, resting and preparing, but she wanted to see him one more time. She wasn't sure what she would say. She wasn't sure she would say anything at all. She just wanted to see him. She found him in the same bed, in the same position, but something had changed. He was thinner now, the bones of his face more prominent, the shadows under his eyes darker. The dialysis machine hummed its constant tune, but his breathing had taken on a new quality, shallow, careful, as though each breath required conscious effort.
Nia.
His voice was barely a whisper, but his eyes brightened when he saw her. I thought you'd gone on vacation. Something like that. She sat in the familiar chair, the one that had molded itself to her shape over countless late-night visits. How are you feeling? Terrible, he said, with a ghost of his old humor. But I've been terrible before. It's becoming rather routine. He shifted slightly, wincing. They told me something strange today. They said a donor has been found.
Through some kind of exchange program.
A kidney, apparently, that matches me perfectly. Nia kept her face neutral, though her heart was pounding. That's wonderful news. Is it? He studied her with those hazel eyes, and she had the unsettling sense that he could see straight through her. I've been on no list. I have no insurance, no address. I am, by every measure, the last person who should receive a transplant. And yet, miraculously, a kidney has appeared. He paused, almost as though someone arranged it. Does it matter how it happened? I suppose not. But his gaze lingered on her face a moment longer than necessary. The surgery is scheduled for Friday. The same day, I'm told, as the donor's procedure. Different hospitals, of course. Very proper. She couldn't speak. Her throat had closed around something that felt like a secret wanting to escape.
Nia.
His voice was soft, almost unbearably gentle. Whatever you're planning to do, whatever you've already done, I want you to know that you don't owe me anything. You've already given me more than I deserved. More than I ever expected. I don't know what you're talking about, she managed. Of course you don't. He smiled, and it was the saddest, most beautiful smile she had ever seen. Thank you. For everything. She stayed with him until the shift changed, holding his hand in the dim light, saying nothing because nothing needed to be said. The surgery went well. That was what they told her afterward, when she surfaced from the anesthesia into a fog of pain and fluorescent light. Textbook procedure, the surgeon said, his voice professionally cheerful. The kidney is healthy. The recipient is responding well. You're going to be fine. Amara was there, as promised, her eyes red-rimmed and her hand wrapped around Nia's. You scared me, she said. Don't ever do that again. I'll try, Nia whispered. Her voice was hoarse, her mouth cotton dry, but she was smiling. She could feel the absence in her body, a strange emptiness on her left side, where something vital had been. But she could also feel something else, a lightness, as though she had set down a burden she hadn't known she was carrying. She slept, and when she woke, it was dark outside, and Amara was gone. In her place was a young nurse Nia didn't recognize, checking the monitors with quiet efficiency. Water. Nia croaked. The nurse poured her a cup, helped her sip. Your sister went to get food. She'll be back soon. A pause. There was a message for you, by the way, from the transplant coordinator. She said the recipient is out of surgery and doing well. She said he asked about you. About me? About the donor. The nurse's brow furrowed slightly. I thought it was anonymous, but he kept asking. Wanted to send a thank you card or something. They had to explain that's not how it works. Nia leaned back against her pillow, something warm spreading through her chest. He knew. Of course he knew. He had always known, probably, the same way he knew when someone was having a bad day or when a nervous resident needed encouragement.
He saw things that other people missed.
Tell him, she said, that no thanks are necessary. Tell him to just live. 6 weeks later, Nia returned to work. The scar on her side had faded from angry red to tender pink, a curved line that caught the light when she twisted a certain way. She was careful with herself, no heavy lifting, no sudden movements, but she felt strong. Stronger, somehow, than she had felt in years. As though the surgery had removed something more than just a kidney. As though it had excised some long-held fear. She did not go to see Ben. She had made that decision during her recovery, lying in her narrow hospital bed with Amara reading aloud from trashy magazines. The gift was given. The story was complete. To insert herself back into his life now would be to contaminate the purity of what she had done, to make it about her, when it had never been about her.
But she thought about him.
She thought about him constantly. In fact, the way you think about a word you've forgotten, the shape of it hovering just at the edge of consciousness. She knew, from the nurse's grapevine, that he had been discharged to a rehabilitation facility. She knew that his recovery was proceeding better than expected. She knew that he was alive, and that was enough. It had to be enough. Then, on a Thursday evening in early December, she saw him in the hospital cafeteria. She almost didn't recognize him. He was standing by the coffee station, pouring himself a cup, and the change was so dramatic that her first thought was, wrong person, different man. This man was upright, healthy, his skin warm with color, his frame filled out. He moved with an easy grace that bore no resemblance to the shuffling, hollow figure she had known. But then he turned, and she saw his eyes. Hazel, flecked with gold, still carrying that same unsettling calm. And she knew. He saw her at the same moment. Something passed across his face. Recognition, gratitude, something she couldn't name. And he set down his coffee and walked toward her. Her heart was hammering. She wanted to run.
She wanted to stay.
She didn't know what she wanted.
Nia.
His voice was different too. Stronger. Fuller. The voice of a man who had been given back his life.
Ben.
She couldn't think of anything else to say. All her words had deserted her. I was hoping to see you. He stopped a few feet away, as though aware of some invisible boundary. The nurses said you'd come back. I've been wanting to thank you. You don't need to thank me. The donation was anonymous. Yes, he said. It was. Very anonymous. Remarkably anonymous, considering the timing and the circumstances and the fact that I know exactly one person in this hospital who would do something so impossibly, beautifully irrational. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. He was looking at her with such raw gratitude that the pretense felt obscene. I don't know how to repay you, he said quietly. I don't even know how to begin. You gave me a piece of yourself. You gave me years I didn't think I'd have. How do you thank someone for that? By living, she said. That's all. Just live. I intend to, he smiled, and it was the same smile she remembered, but brighter now, unclouded by pain. Would you let me buy you a cup of coffee? I know it's the most pathetic of gestures, coffee for a kidney, but I'd like to try. She should have said no. She knew, even as she was nodding, that this was a line she shouldn't cross. You don't befriend your transplant recipient. You don't invite that kind of complication into your life. Coffee sounds good, she said. They sat at a corner table, away from the crowds, and talked for 2 hours. He told her about his recovery, the slow return of appetite, the miracle of urine production, the physical therapy sessions that had restored strength to his wasted muscles. She told him about hers, the lingering tenderness, the phantom aches, the strange pride she felt when she looked at her scar. But underneath the medical details, something else was happening. They were learning each other. She discovered that he read constantly, voraciously, everything from philosophy to detective novels. That he had a dry wit she hadn't fully appreciated during his illness. That he laughed easily and listened carefully and asked questions that made her think. She did not ask about his past. The absence was deliberate. A closed door she sensed he wasn't ready to open.
He was Ben.
Just Ben. That was enough. I should go, she said finally, glancing at the clock. I have an early shift tomorrow. Of course. He stood when she did, a small old-fashioned courtesy that made her smile. Nia, thank you. For the coffee and the kidney and everything. I mean it. I know you do. She was halfway across the cafeteria when he called after her. Nia? She turned. I was thinking, he said, about what you said earlier. about living. He paused, something uncertain in his expression. Would you maybe want to get dinner sometime? Not as repayment, just as two people getting dinner. The question hung in the air between them. She thought about professional boundaries. She thought about complications. She thought about all the reasons this was a bad idea. I'd like that, she said. His smile could have powered the hospital. They had dinner that weekend at a small Italian restaurant near the waterfront. The food was good, the wine was better, and by the time dessert arrived, Nia had decided that this was either the best decision she'd ever made or the worst. Possibly both. Ben was a different person in this context. Relaxed, animated, his hazel eyes catching the candlelight. He talked about books he loved and places he wanted to visit, about philosophy and music and the strange beauty of watching the sun rise over the ocean. She found herself leaning forward, drawn in by the warmth of him, the unexpected depth. Can I ask you something? She said, swirling the last of her wine. Anything. Before.
When you were sick.
Where did you come from? How did you end up where you ended up? The lightness in his face dimmed slightly. Not disappeared, just retreated, like the sun behind a cloud. That's a long story, he said. I've got time. He was quiet for a moment, turning his own wine glass in his hands. I had a life once, he said finally. A successful life by most measures. A career. A home. A person I thought I loved. He paused. But the success was built on things I'm not proud of. Compromises. Choices that seemed necessary at the time and turned out to be corrosive. And the person I loved turned out to be someone else entirely. What happened? She tried to kill me. He said it flatly, without drama. Not directly. She was too clever for that. But she arranged circumstances where my death would have been convenient. I escaped, barely. And I decided that whoever I had been before, that person deserved to die. So I let him. I walked away from everything and became no one. Ben, the homeless man. A man without a history. Nia absorbed this in silence. It explained things, the calm, the acceptance, the way he had seemed to be waiting for an ending that never quite came. He hadn't just been dying of kidney failure. He had been dying of something older, something that had nothing to do with his organs. Do you regret it? She asked. Regret becoming no one? He considered the question.
No.
I regret the person I was before. I regret the things I did, the people I hurt. But becoming Ben, that was the first honest thing I'd done in years. The first time I wasn't performing a version of myself for someone else's benefit. And now. He looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Something vulnerable and uncertain, and entirely new. Now I'm not sure. You've given me time I didn't expect to have. I don't know what to do with it yet, but I know I want to find out. The candle between them flickered, casting shadows across the table. Nia reached across and touched his hand, her fingers brushing the familiar crescent moon birthmark on his wrist. Then find out, she said. 2 months into whatever they had become, dating seemed too mundane a word, though no better one presented itself. Nia began to hear the rumors. They started as whispers in the nurse's station, idle chatter she didn't pay attention to at first. Something about a documentary. Something about a tech company. Something about a missing billionaire. She caught fragments. Yacht accident, presumed dead, 5 years. Nothing that connected to her life, so she let it wash over her. Then Amara called. Have you seen this documentary? Her sister asked, without preamble. The one about the aperture guy? I don't watch documentaries. Nia was at home, making dinner, her phone wedged between her shoulder and ear. Why? Because it's all anyone's talking about. Benjamin Richard, the tech genius who founded Aperture and then disappeared from his yacht 5 years ago. They never found a body. Everyone assumed he was dead, but this documentary is suggesting maybe he wasn't. Maybe he just vanished. Interesting. What does this have to do with me? A pause. Maybe nothing. But there's this one detail that keeps coming up. The detective on the case says the one thing that could identify him for certain is a birthmark. A crescent moon on his wrist. The knife slipped in Nia's hand. She caught it before it clattered to the counter, but her fingers had gone numb.
Nia?
You there? I'm here. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. I have to go. I'll call you back. She hung up before Amara could respond. For a long moment, she stood perfectly still in her kitchen, the half-chopped vegetables forgotten, her mind racing through implications she didn't want to face. Ben had a crescent moon birthmark on his wrist. She had seen it 100 times, traced its outline with her eyes during countless blood draws and late-night vigils. It was one of the small details she had memorized about him, part of the landscape of his body. It was a coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. The world was full of birthmarks. But even as she told herself this, she was reaching for her laptop, typing the name into the search bar with fingers that trembled slightly. Benjamin Richard. The results were overwhelming. Thousands of articles, videos, profiles. She clicked on an image search and felt her breath leave her body. The man in the photographs was younger, healthier, dressed in expensive suits and surrounded by the trappings of obscene wealth. His hair was darker, his face fuller, his posture radiating the kind of confidence that came from decades of getting everything he wanted. He looked nothing like the hollowed-out shell she had found in her emergency room. But his eyes were the same. Hazel, flecked with gold, carrying that unsettling calm even in photographs where he was smiling for cameras. And on his wrist, visible in a candid shot of him signing some document, was a small crescent moon. Nia closed the laptop, opened it again, closed it. She sat in her kitchen for a very long time, watching the light change outside her window, trying to understand what she had discovered and what it meant. She didn't confront him immediately. Part of her wasn't sure how to begin. So, are you a dead billionaire? Seemed both inadequate and absurd. Part of her was afraid of what his answer might reveal. And part of her, the part she was least proud of, was simply hurt. He had lied to her. Or, if not lied, exactly, then withheld. He had let her believe he was no one, when in fact he was someone very specific. Someone with a history. Someone with enemies. Someone, perhaps, who had used her. That thought was the hardest to sit with. She had given him a kidney. She had given him her time, her attention, her growing affection. Had any of it been real? Or had she been a convenient instrument in some larger game she didn't understand? She watched him carefully over the following days, looking for signs of deception. But he was the same Ben he had always been. Kind, attentive, self-deprecating in a way that charmed her despite her suspicions. He brought her flowers for no reason. He remembered the small details of her stories. He looked at her like she was the most interesting person in any room. Either he was the world's greatest actor, or his feelings for her were genuine. Nia couldn't decide which possibility frightened her more. The documentary aired on a Tuesday. Nia watched it alone in her living room, a glass of wine untouched on the table beside her. It was well made, she had to admit. The filmmakers had done their research. They traced Benjamin Richard's rise from middle-class obscurity to tech royalty, his founding of Aperture with his college girlfriend Sloane Devereaux, their subsequent engagement, the company's explosive growth. They interviewed former employees who spoke of his brilliance, his vision, his increasingly erratic behavior in the months before his disappearance. And then they got to Sloane. She was beautiful, in a cold, geometric way, all sharp angles and pale eyes and hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. She spoke of Benjamin with practiced sorrow, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. She described a man coming apart at the seams, consumed by paranoid delusions, convinced that everyone around him was plotting against him. I tried to help him, she said, her voice trembling with what might have been genuine emotion or might have been performance. I tried so hard.
But he was beyond help by the end.
He was convinced I was the enemy. And then one night, he just disappeared. We found his boat drifting 3 miles from shore. Empty. I still have nightmares about it. The detective came on next, a tired-looking man with gray hair and the resigned expression of someone who had seen too much. He explained the investigation, the dead ends, the eventual conclusion that Benjamin Richard had either fallen overboard or taken his own life. The only thing that could change our assessment, he said, would be if he turned up alive. And the only way we could confirm his identity would be through DNA or the birthmark. He had a very distinctive mark on his wrist, a crescent moon. His mother used to say it meant he was touched by something special. The documentary ended with questions. Was Benjamin Richard dead? Was he in hiding? Had Sloane Devereaux, who had inherited control of Aperture and increased its value tenfold, somehow orchestrated his disappearance? The filmmakers didn't answer. They simply let the questions hang there, tantalizing and unresolved. Nia turned off the television and sat in the dark for a long time. She confronted him the next evening. He had come to her house for dinner, as he often did now, and they were sitting on her small porch watching the streetlights flicker on. The air was cold, carrying the first hints of approaching winter, and he had draped his jacket over her shoulders without being asked. "I watched that documentary," she said. "The one about Aperture." She felt him go still beside her. Not dramatically. He wasn't the type for dramatic reactions, but a subtle tension entered his body, a coiling of muscles preparing for flight or fight. "I see," he said quietly. "Is it you?" A long pause. The streetlight nearest them buzzed and flickered. Somewhere in the distance, a dog was barking. "Yes," he said. "It's me." The confirmation hit her harder than she expected. She had known, of course. Had known since she saw the photographs. But hearing him say it made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "Benjamin Richard," she said, testing the name. "Not Ben. Benjamin Richard. The billionaire everyone thinks is dead." "I was Benjamin Richard," he said. "I'm not sure what I am now. Someone different, I hope. Someone better." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid." His voice was low, stripped of all pretense. "Afraid you'd look at me differently. Afraid you'd see the person I used to be instead of the person I'm trying to become. Afraid you'd..." He stopped, swallowed. "Afraid you'd realize I didn't deserve what you gave me." "What I gave you?"
The kidney, yes. But not just that.
"The attention."
The care.
"The second chance." He turned to face her, and his eyes were wet in the dim light. "You saw a dying homeless man and decided he was worth saving. I was terrified that if you knew the truth, you'd realize you'd made a mistake. That you'd wasted your gift on someone who had already wasted everything else." Nia absorbed this in silence. Her anger was still there, a hot coal in her chest, but it was competing now with something else. Something that might have been compassion, or might have been love, or might have been the recognition that human beings were complicated and rarely fit into neat categories of victim and villain. "Tell me about Sloane," she said. He told her everything. He told her about meeting Sloane in college, about being dazzled by her intelligence and ambition, about founding Aperture together in a cramped garage apartment that smelled of old pizza and possibility. He told her about the early years, when they were partners in every sense, finishing each other's sentences, staying up until dawn debugging code, dreaming of a future they were certain they could build.
He told her about how it changed.
How success brought out something in Sloane that had always been there, perhaps, but hidden. A coldness. A willingness to sacrifice anything, anyone for the sake of the company. He told her about the employees she'd crushed, the competitors she'd destroyed, the ethical lines she'd crossed without a backward glance. And he told her about his growing horror as he realized that the woman he loved had become someone he didn't recognize. "I tried to stop her," he said. "I tried to change the direction of the company, to bring back the values we'd started with. But she was always 3 steps ahead. She had the board in her pocket. She had the investors convinced I was losing my grip. And then she started talking about my mental state. About how worried she was. About how maybe I needed help. She was gaslighting you. Expertly. By the end, I wasn't sure myself what was real and what wasn't. The only thing I knew for certain was that she wanted me gone. The company was worth billions by then, and my shares represented the only obstacle to her total control." He paused, his jaw tightening. The night on the yacht wasn't an accident. She'd arranged it, the isolation, the rough seas, the conveniently malfunctioning safety equipment. I was supposed to go overboard and never come back. But you survived. Barely. I made it to shore more dead than alive. And I realized that whoever I had been, Benjamin Richard, tech genius, billionaire, that person was exactly who she wanted to kill. So, I let him die. I walked away from everything. I became no one. And ended up in my emergency room 5 years later. Yes. He looked at her with something that might have been wonder. I had no idea, when I came to that hospital, that I would find someone like you. I thought I was just going to die quietly and be forgotten. I thought that was what I deserved. Nia was quiet for a long time. The dog had stopped barking. The street was silent except for the rustle of dead leaves. The documentary suggested that Sloan might have been involved in your disappearance, she said finally. But it didn't prove anything. And now she's the CEO of a major tech company. What happens if she finds out you're alive? His expression darkened. I don't know. Nothing good, I imagine. She spent 5 years building her empire on the assumption that I'm dead. If I resurface, she'd lose everything.
Yes.
Which means she'd do whatever it takes to make sure that doesn't happen. The implication hung between them, heavy and cold. Nia had spent her career fighting death, monitoring vitals, administering medications, calling codes. But she had never had to consider the possibility that someone might be trying to cause it. Not through disease or accident, but through deliberate, calculated action. We should go to the police, she said. With what evidence? My word against hers? She's been preparing for this possibility for years. She has lawyers, PR teams, a carefully constructed narrative. I'm the unstable ex who faked his own death. She's the grieving fiancé who nobly carried on. Who do you think they'll believe? He was right, and Nia hated that he was right. The world wasn't fair. The powerful protected themselves. And sometimes the truth wasn't enough. Then what do? She asked. He reached out and took her hand. His fingers were warm, steady. I don't know yet. But whatever happens, I want you to know, you're not a mistake. You're not a wasted gift. You're the best thing that's happened to me in longer than I can remember. And I will do whatever it takes to protect you from the consequences of my past. She should have been reassured. Instead, she felt the first stirrings of a new fear. Not fear of Sloan exactly, though that was there too. Fear of how quickly her life had become entangled with his. Fear of how much she had come to need him. Fear of all the ways this could go wrong. I can protect myself, she said. I know you can. He squeezed her hand. That's one of the things I love about you. It was the first time either of them had used that word. It hung in the cold air between them, fragile and true. Sloan Devereaux came to the hospital on a Thursday. Nia was in the middle of a shift, elbows deep in the controlled chaos of a multi-car accident, when she heard the commotion. A woman's voice, sharp and imperious, cutting through the usual noise of the emergency department. I said I need to see whoever's in charge. This is a matter of some urgency. She didn't think anything of it at first. The ER attracted all types, including the occasionally demanding. But something about the voice nagged at her, a half-remembered echo that wouldn't quite resolve into recognition. It wasn't until she emerged from the trauma bay, peeling off her bloody gloves, that she saw her. Sloan was standing at the nurse's station, engaged in heated conversation with the charge nurse. She was exactly as she'd appeared in the documentary, tall, angular, blonde hair pulled back with geometric precision. Her clothes probably cost more than Nia's car. Her face wore an expression of controlled frustration, the look of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted and not enjoying the experience of delay. Nia's first instinct was to retreat, to find a back hallway, a supply closet, anywhere out of sight. But before she could move, Sloane's pale eyes swept the room and found her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Sloane smiled, a thin, precise smile that didn't reach her eyes, and began walking toward her. You must be Nia West, she said. Her voice was pleasant, modulated, the kind of voice that had been trained to command boardrooms. I've heard so much about you. Nia forced herself to breathe normally. I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage.
Go eat.
The smile widened slightly. My name is Sloan Devereaux. I believe you've been spending time with someone very dear to me. Someone I've been looking for a very long time." The words were perfectly civil, perfectly reasonable. A concerned friend looking for a lost loved one. But underneath them, Nia heard something else. A threat, wrapped in silk. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said.
No?
"That's strange." Sloane reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. It was a shot of Nia and Ben leaving a restaurant together, his hand on the small of her back, both of them smiling. Clearly taken without their knowledge. Because this seems pretty clear to me. Nia's blood went cold. She had been followed. They had been followed. Which meant Sloane already knew everything. Where Ben was staying, where Nia lived, probably even what they'd had for dinner. "I have resources," Sloane continued, as if reading her thoughts. "I've spent 5 years looking for him, you know. Ever since that terrible night on the boat. I never stopped believing he was alive somewhere, waiting to be found." She paused, her eyes hardening. "And now I've found him. Thanks to you. I think you should leave."
I will.
"I just wanted to meet you first." The woman who saved his life. Her gaze dropped to Nia's side, where the scar lay hidden under her scrubs. The woman who gave him a piece of herself. "That's quite a gift, Nia. I wonder if you know what you were really giving it to." "I know exactly what I was giving it to. A good man." Sloane laughed, a short, sharp sound like breaking glass. "A good man. That's sweet. That's really very sweet. Has he told you about the people he stepped on to build his empire? Has he told you about the promises he broke, the lives he ruined? Has he told you what he did to your father?" The floor seemed to tilt slightly. "What?"
Oh,
Sloane's expression shifted to something that might have been genuine surprise.
he didn't tell you that part.
"How interesting." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Arthur West, the history teacher who invested his life savings in Aperture back when it was just 2 kids in a garage. The man who believed in Benjamin's vision so completely that he bet his family's future on it. And who was pushed out 3 years later, his shares bought back for a fraction of their value, his reputation destroyed to keep him from making noise." She straightened, smoothing her jacket. "Benjamin was the one who signed that order, Nia. He was the one who decided your father wasn't useful anymore." The words hit like physical blows. Nia wanted to deny them, to call them lies, but something in Sloane's eyes suggested she was telling at least a version of the truth. "I can see I've given you a lot to think about," Sloane said. "I'll leave you to it."
But Nia?
A word of advice from one woman to another. She paused at the door, silhouetted against the harsh hospital lights. "Be careful who you trust. The person you think you know might not be the person they really are." Then she was gone, leaving Nia standing in the middle of the emergency department, the chaos of the world continuing around her as though nothing had changed. She confronted him that night. She couldn't wait, couldn't sit with a poison Sloane had planted without knowing if it was true. He was at his apartment, the modest 1-bedroom he'd rented after leaving the rehabilitation facility. When he opened the door and saw her face, he knew immediately that something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked. "Are you okay?" "Sloane came to see me." He went pale. "At the hospital?" "She came to the hospital. She showed me pictures. Of us." Nia pushed past him into the apartment, too agitated to sit. "She's been following us. She knows everything. And she told me," her voice cracked. "She told me about my father." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Nia had ever heard. "Your father," he said slowly. "Arthur West. You knew." It wasn't a question. "You knew this whole time. You knew when you were lying in my emergency room. You knew when I was deciding whether to give you a kidney. You knew when She couldn't finish. "Nia, please. Did you do it? Did you push him out? Did you destroy him?" His face crumpled. It was like watching a building collapse, all the carefully constructed walls coming down at once. "Yes," he said. "I did. Not alone, Sloane orchestrated most of it, but I signed the papers. I let it happen. I told myself it was just business, that he would be fine, that..." He stopped, swallowed. "I was wrong. I was young and stupid and wrong, and I have regretted it every day since." "You knew." She said it again because she couldn't stop saying it. You knew who I was. You knew what you did to my family. And you let me save your life anyway. I didn't know. Not at first. He reached for her. She stepped back. When I came to the hospital, I was delirious. I didn't know my own name half the time. It wasn't until later, when the fog started to clear, that I remembered. I saw your name badge, and I thought it was some kind of cosmic joke. Some kind of punishment. The daughter of the man I destroyed, holding my hand while I died. And you didn't tell me. I was afraid. His voice broke. I was a coward. I thought if I told you, you would leave. And I couldn't. He stopped, pressing his hand to his eyes. I couldn't bear that. Not after everything you'd given me. Nia stood in the middle of his cramped apartment, surrounded by the evidence of his new life. The cheap furniture, the library books, the small plant on the windowsill she had given him as a housewarming gift, and felt something tearing inside her. She had thought she knew him. She had thought, despite everything, that the connection between them was real. Now she wasn't sure of anything. My father died believing he was a failure, she said quietly. He spent his last years struggling to pay bills, taking on extra tutoring jobs, pretending everything was fine when we all knew it wasn't. And you were living on a yacht, dating the woman who destroyed him, building your empire on the wreckage of people like him. I know. He never recovered. Not really. He lost his savings, but that wasn't the worst part. He lost his faith. He believed in people, in second chances, in the fundamental goodness of the world. And you took that from him. I know. Tears were streaming down his face now, but he made no move to wipe them away. I know what I took. I've known it for years. That's why I walked away from everything. That's why I let Benjamin Richer die. Because he deserved to die. He was a monster. And what does that make you now? I don't know. He looked at her with raw, desperate honesty. I've been trying to figure that out. I hoped that maybe I could be someone different. Someone worthy of what you gave me. But maybe that's not possible. Maybe the past doesn't let go that easily. Nia wanted to scream at him. She wanted to throw things, to hurt him the way she was hurting. But underneath the anger, underneath the betrayal, she kept seeing her father's face. Not the bitter, broken man of his last years, but the father she'd grown up with. The one who brought home stray dogs and forgave her lies and believed, until the very end, that people could change. My father, she said slowly, used to say that the measure of a person isn't the mistakes they make. It's what they do after. He looked up at her, not quite daring to hope. I don't know if I can forgive you, she continued. I don't know if I can ever look at you without seeing what you did. But I know what he would say if he were here. He would say that you've already been punished enough. He would say that holding on to anger only poisons the person who holds it. She paused, her throat tight. He would say that you deserve a chance to prove you've changed. I have changed, he said. Or I'm trying to. Every day, I'm trying. Then prove it. She moved toward the door, needing air, needing space. Not to me, to yourself. To the memory of everyone you hurt. Prove that you're not the same person who signed those papers.
How?
She turned back, her hand on the doorknob. I don't know, but you have resources. You have knowledge. Sloane is still out there, still hurting people. Maybe start there. Then she was gone, leaving him alone with his guilt and his tears and the terrible weight of his past. Benjamin Richard, not Ben, not anymore. She couldn't think of him as Ben, didn't contact her for 3 days. They were the longest 3 days of Nia's life. She went through the motions of work, of eating, of sleeping, but her mind was elsewhere. It kept circling back to the same questions. Had anything between them been real? Could she ever trust him again? And underneath those, a darker question she didn't want to examine too closely. Was she angry at him for what he'd done, or for not telling her? On the 4th day, an envelope arrived at her house. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in handwriting she didn't recognize.
Nia?
Asterisk, I've spent the last 3 days going through files I kept hidden before I disappeared. Evidence of Sloane's activities. Not just what she did to your father, but everything after.
Illégale surveillance.
Market manipulation. Bribery of government officials. Enough to bring her down if it gets into the right hands. Asterisk. Asterisk, I'm sending copies to 3 journalists, 2 federal prosecutors, and the FBI. I've also set up a trust fund in your father's name, funded with money that should have been his, plus interest. It won't make up for what was stolen, but it will pay for scholarships for students who can't afford college. History students, specifically. I thought he would have liked that. Asterisk. Asterisk, I know this doesn't fix anything. I know words are cheap and actions are what matter. But I want you to know that I heard what you said. I'm trying to prove I've changed. I'm trying to be someone your father might have believed in. Asterisk. Asterisk, I'm leaving the city for a while. The journalists have already started making calls, and Sloan will know soon that her empire is crumbling. I don't know what she'll do, but I don't want you anywhere near the fallout. You've already given me more than I deserved. I won't ask you to give more. Asterisk. Asterisk, if you never want to see me again, I understand. If you do, if there's any chance you might someday look at me and see something other than the monster I used to be, you know where to find me. Asterisk. Asterisk, thank you. For everything. Asterisk.
B.
Nia read the letter 3 times. Then she sat on her porch for a very long time, watching the children play in the fading afternoon light, thinking about second chances and the strange ways the past reaches into the present. The story broke 2 weeks later. It started with a single article in a national newspaper citing documents obtained by investigative journalists that revealed widespread corruption at Aperture. Within hours, other outlets had picked up the story. By the end of the week, federal investigators had launched a formal inquiry. By the end of the month, Sloan Devereaux had been indicted on 17 counts of fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. She denied everything, of course. She claimed the documents were fabricated, that she was the victim of an elaborate frame-up by disgruntled former employees. But the evidence was overwhelming: emails, memos, financial records, all pointing to a pattern of illegal activity that stretched back nearly a decade. Her lawyers fought every step, but slowly, inexorably, her empire began to crumble. Nia watched the coverage with a mixture of satisfaction and unease. This was justice, real justice, for her father and all the others Sloan had crushed. But it had come at a cost. Benjamin was in the wind, hiding from a woman who would now have nothing left to lose. And somewhere in the chaos, whatever might have existed between them had been lost too. Or so she thought. 3 months after the letter, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find a woman she didn't recognize, young, professional, carrying a manila folder. Nia West, the woman asked. Yes. My name is Elena Vesquez. I'm an attorney representing the Arthur West Educational Foundation. She handed Nia a business card. We've been trying to reach you about a matter of some importance. Nia looked at the card, then back at the woman. The Arthur West Foundation?
Yes.
I understand you're not aware of its activities yet, but you've been named as a primary beneficiary and board member. The founder was quite specific about that. Elena smiled slightly. He also left instructions that I was to give you this personally, once the initial legal matters were settled. She handed Nia the folder. Inside was another letter, along with a thick sheaf of documents, trust agreements, financial statements, bylaws for the foundation. The letter was brief.
Nia.
Asterisk, the foundation is now fully operational. 14 scholarships have been awarded so far, all to students who remind me of your father. The first class includes a young woman from the East Side who wants to teach history, a first-generation college student who wrote his application essay about the importance of remembering the past, and a single mother who went back to school at 40 to finish her degree. Asterisk. Asterisk, I wish I could have met your father. I think he would have liked these students. I think he would have been proud of what we're building in his name. Asterisk. Asterisk, I'm still in hiding, but I wanted you to know that I'm okay. More than okay. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm doing something that matters. Something good. Asterisk. Asterisk, there's an address at the bottom of this letter. It's a small cottage on the coast, far from everything. If you ever want to visit, the door is always open. Asterisk. Asterisk, I'm not asking for anything. I'm just saying that if you're ready, if you think there might be a chance, I would very much like to see you again. Asterisk. Asterisk, either way, thank you. For believing that people could change. For being the kind of person who gives dying strangers pieces of herself because it's the right thing to do. For being your father's daughter. Asterisk. With love. Benjamin. Nia read the letter while Elena waited patiently on her porch. Then she read it again. Then she folded it carefully and slipped it into her pocket. Thank you, she told Elena. I'll be in touch about the foundation. Of course. Take your time. Elena hesitated, then added. He talks about you, you know. Not by name. He's very careful about that, but it's obvious. The way his face changes. He loves you very much. Nia didn't answer. She just stood on her porch, holding the folder full of documents, watching Elena's car disappear down the street. The door is always open. She thought about her father, who had died believing his investments in people were wasted. She thought about her mother, who had never stopped believing that kindness was the only currency that mattered. She thought about the scar on her side, the piece of herself that now lived inside a man she had thought she knew, then thought she didn't, then thought she might know after all. The truth was, she didn't know what she wanted. She didn't know if she could ever fully forgive him, or if forgiveness was even the right word for what they needed. She only knew that somewhere on the coast, in a small cottage far from everything, a man was waiting. A man who had done terrible things and was trying to do better. A man who had been given a second chance and was actually using it. She thought about second chances, about the weight of the past and the possibility of the future. About all the ways people can fail each other and all the ways, against all odds, they can find their way back. Then she went inside to pack a bag. Hashtag epilogue. The weight of small mercies. The cottage was smaller than she'd expected. It sat on a bluff overlooking the ocean, a weather-beaten structure that had been bleached gray by decades of salt wind. There was a garden out front, badly tended, clearly the work of someone who had more enthusiasm than skill, and a porch with 2 chairs, positioned to watch the sunset. He was in one of those chairs when she arrived. Watching for her, probably. He stood as she approached, his expression caught somewhere between hope and fear. You came, he said. I came. They stood there for a moment, separated by 3 feet of porch and 5 years of secrets. Then Nia climbed the steps and sat in the empty chair. I'm not ready to forgive you, she said. I may never be ready, but I'm here. That's all I can promise. That's enough. He sat beside her, not touching, just present. That's more than enough. They watched the sun sink toward the water, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The ocean rolled and retreated, eternal and indifferent, the same waves that had crashed against the shore for millions of years and would continue long after they were both gone. My father used to say that history wasn't about the past, Nia said quietly. It was about understanding why things happen so we can make better choices in the future. He sounds like a wise man. He was. She paused. He was also stubborn and idealistic and sometimes infuriatingly optimistic about people. He believed everyone deserved a second chance, even when they didn't deserve it. Especially when they didn't deserve it. Do you believe that? Nia thought about the question. Thought about her father, about Ben, about all the complicated, contradictory pieces of human beings that didn't fit neatly into categories of good and evil. Thought about the kidney that now beat inside the man beside her, keeping him alive, connecting them in a way that could never be undone. I'm trying to, she said finally. I'm trying. The sun touched the horizon and began to sink. Benjamin reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His hand found hers, warm and familiar, and they sat together in the fading light. They didn't talk about the future. They didn't make promises or plans. They just sat there, 2 scarred people on a weathered porch, watching the day end and the stars begin to appear. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't happily ever after. It was just 2 people, sitting with the weight of the past, choosing to face whatever came next together. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything.